In the mouth, we have over 700 different species in that little tiny space, over 700 different species living on your teeth, your gums, your tongue, the roof of your mouth, the insides of your cheeks, all around. And just like the gut, these are not all bad guys, even though they're bacteria. The vast majority are either neutral or actively working for you. They help keep your teeth mineralized. They crowd out the troublemakers. They help regulate the pH in your mouth. Some of them, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, even play a role in your blood pressure. How's that for interesting? The problem isn't the presence of bacteria. The problem is dysbiosis, the same word we use with the gut all the time. Welcome to Vitality Radio, the podcast that helps you make sense of natural supplements and thrive without pharma drugs. I'm Jared St. Clair. I grew up in a health food store and spent over 40 years now figuring out what works and what doesn't, so that you can make confident, informed decisions about nutrition, supplements, and your health. For most of my life, I just assumed that I had bad teeth because when I was a kid, I had all kinds of cavities. Now, I'd been told that eating too much sugar was a problem, and I'm going to confess to you today, like I did on the episode I talked about GLP-1, that yes, I was a sugarholic. I have been for most of my life. Not so much now that I've finally got on GLP-1 metabolic optimizer, but my gosh, sugar has been my arch nemesis. I joke about it, but it's true. I got a sweet tooth from my mom, and I got another sweet tooth from my dad. And while my dentist has removed teeth from me, he's never removed those, which is super annoying because one thing my parents knew is they knew how to feed me healthy, but they also had sweet teeth. And oh my gosh, I would take my health food store paycheck, which was extremely small, working for the family business with no labor laws really in force. And I would go spend it on junk food and mostly sugar. Big fan of sugar. So I had cavities galore. I wasn't the best toothbrusher in the world. I didn't love flossing. Some people call me pretty smart nowadays, but maybe as a kid, not so much. I don't know. Regardless, by the time I was a young man, I had eight, count them, 8 root canals. Now, I've talked on other episodes how those have impacted me, leading to significant joint inflammation and problems that I'm still cleaning up today. And maybe I'll get into that on some future episodes. But regardless, today I want to talk about the oral microbiome. I want to talk about how critical it is and what I wish I had known when I was a young man, even a younger man than I am now, that I didn't really start figuring out with my microbiome until a good 10, 12 years ago in my mouth, because I knew a lot about the gut microbiome for a long time, not so much about the oral microbiome. And I want to help to educate you so that you can avoid some of the same pitfalls that I have fallen into, and certainly help your kids and others as well, because oral health can lead to significant health issues, including autoimmune issues. And I believe that my health issues that I have as a 53, almost 54-year-old man, as I'm recording this, are almost exclusively because of what happened in my oral microbiome when I was a younger man. So what I didn't do that many Americans, and I hope not you, but that's why I do this show. If you haven't figured this out yet, we're going to talk about this, is I didn't nuke my mouth. I wasn't using Scope or Listerine or, fluoride rinses or any of that kind of stuff. My parents knew better and they taught me better. What they didn't know is that root canals are evil and can create an unbelievable amount of havoc. I didn't know that when I was younger. Didn't learn that until, as I said, more recently. Maybe you've heard me talk with Dr. Michelle Jorgensen on my show, or talk about root canals. I've done a few shows on this now. But what I really want to focus on today is what I currently am doing to no longer get cavities like I used to get on a regular basis, and some things that I've discovered recently that I'm really excited about. I just did a show on my favorite probiotic strains, and you can go back to the last episode of Vitality Radio to check that one out. And one of the strains that I talked about was Lactobacillus salivarius. Lactobacillus salivarius is, well, it's what it sounds like. It's a probiotic that's actually found in the saliva in the mouth. but it's found in some other places too. I don't want to get into that. I want to talk about what I'm doing as far as toothpaste, what I'm doing in terms of oral rinses, and what I am now recommending as a oral health protocol to resolve the issues that you may be having with your oral health so that you can not have to get into the trouble that I've been in, or if you already have gotten into that trouble, that we can get you out of it. Okay. So let's talk about the oral microbiome and what it actually is. Most people think about the gut when they think about the microbiome, but did you know that while in the gut we have thousands of different species of bacteria living in the gut, in the mouth we have over 700 different species in that little tiny space, over 700 different species living on your teeth, your gums, your tongue, the roof of your mouth, the insides of your cheeks, all around. And just like the gut, these are not all bad guys, even though they're bacteria. The vast majority are either neutral or actively working for you. They help keep your teeth mineralized. They crowd out the troublemakers. They help regulate the pH in your mouth. Some of them, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, even play a role in your blood pressure. How's that for interesting? The problem isn't the presence of bacteria. The problem is dysbiosis, the same word we use with the gut all the time. That's the word for when balance tips and when the opportunistic species get the upper hand and start to dominate the mouth. When that happens, you get the stuff everybody knows: plaque buildup, that fuzzy film on your teeth, bad breath, gum irritation, and decay. And here's the part that took me way too long to understand. Plaque is not just food residue you forgot to scrub off. Plaque is a biofilm, a structured, organized community of microbes that builds itself a little fortress so that it can't be easily washed away. You can't outbrush a biofilm that's being constantly rebuilt by an out of balance ecosystem. You can scrub all day, and if the underlying community is dysbiotic, it just rebuilds. That's the root cause of the eye brush and floss and still have problems. Frustration. It's not that you're lazy, it's that you've been handed a scrubbing strategy for what is actually an ecosystem problem. So why does killing everything backfire? Well, it's exactly what we talk about in the gut. When you take an antibiotic, it takes no prisoners. It kills the good guys, it kills the bad guys, and oftentimes the opportunistic bad guys that are left take over and cause problems. So antiseptic mouthwashes, and the big name, of course, is Listerine, but there's a lot of them out there that have chlorhexidine in them, alcohol, other things like that. They go in and they do what they say they do. They kill 99.9% of germs. That's exactly what they do, but that's exactly the problem with them. They don't know the difference between the good guys and the bad guys any more than an antibiotic does in the gut. So when you think about mouthwash, or at least not the clean ones from like Just Ingredients or Spry or places like that, David's, there are good ones out there. I use mouth rinses, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when you use the bad ones, like the Listerines and the Scopes and those types of products, you're killing off the bad guys. You're creating dysbiosis, and you're basically killing not just the weeds, but the whole garden. And here's where it gets really interesting. And this is one of the areas of this show that I really want to talk about and focus on. There's a specific group of friendly bacteria in your mouth called nitrate reducing bacteria. Their job is to take the nitrates that you eat, primarily from vegetables, think beets, because that's where a very high concentration of nitrates come from, but you get them in all kinds of other vegetables as well. And it converts them into nitrites, which your body then turns and makes into nitric oxide. And we love nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a big deal. In fact, a show that I'm preparing that I'll probably deliver not too long after this one is all about nitric oxide. And I'll just give you a quick little synopsis of what that's going to be about. I'm going to talk about beets. I'm going to talk about arginine. I'm going to be talking about citrulline, other food sources of nitric oxide, or at least nitrates that you can turn into nitric oxide. And I'll let you in on a little secret about what you need to know about what actually works. But did you know that your body makes nitric oxide from these vegetables if you have the bacteria in your mouth that breaks that down into nitrates? And when you do make nitric oxide from the food you eat, it makes you healthier. It makes your heart healthier. It makes blood pressure more balanced. It provides more energy, more blood flow, even better sexual performance. There's all kinds of things that nitric oxide can do for you. But when you nuke your mouth with an antiseptic rinse like Listerine, you're actually wiping out those nitrate reducing bacteria along with everything else. And the research here is super eye-opening to me. In 2013, a study out of the University of London found that when healthy people used a chlorhexidine antiseptic mouthwash, their body's ability to convert nitrate to nitrite was shut down, and their blood pressure measurably went up. A later 2019 study in a group of healthy dental professionals found the same pattern. Twice a day antiseptic rinsing for 1 week was associated with a rise in systolic blood pressure. And a 2020 study confirmed that the same rinse caused a major shift in the whole salivary microbiome and lowered nitrite levels. Now, think about the irony here. But it's really not that ironic, because when we think about medicine in this country and we think about dental work in this country, we think about so many things in this country, food and everything else, what's designed or at least sold to us as making us healthier is actually making us sick. And you wouldn't think that Listerine could harm your cardiovascular health, would you? But it absolutely can. And this gets at something that's kind of a personal motto of mine. Germs are our friends. And I mean that. I'm not afraid of bacteria. I'm afraid of what we do when we declare all-out war on them. I can't stand hand sanitizer. I can't stand Listerine. I'm not a fan of antibiotics unless they're truly necessary, like life-saving in most cases is when they should be used. And I think antibacterial soaps and disinfectant wipes for every surface in the house have done us far more harm than good. And it's not just that I think that that's the case. It is the case. We know that it is. Your immune system is like a muscle. It needs real-world exposure to develop properly. Raise it in a sterile bubble and it doesn't get stronger. It gets weaker and more confused. There's a landmark study that was done in 2016, just 10 years ago, out of the University of Chicago, published in one of the most respected medical journals in the world, that compared two farming communities, the Amish and the Hutterites, who are almost genetically identical. The Amish kids, who grow up surrounded by animals with a much richer world of microbes, had about 4 times less asthma and roughly 6 times less allergic sensitization than the Hutterite kids on their sterile, industrialized farms. Same genes, wildly different immune outcomes. The only real difference that they focused on in the study anyway was microbial exposure. Too clean, it turns out, can make you more unhealthy, a less resilient individual. And I've been shouting that from the rooftops for years. Germs are our friends. People talk about the 10-second rule. I'm like a 30-second to a minute rule guy. I just don't care. I would rather come in contact with these things. You're never going to see me wipe off a shopping cart with one of those stupid Clorox wipes. I'm just not going to do it. And I'm going to avoid antibacterial soaps as much as I possibly can. And this is also where the fluoride-free conversation comes in, because I know most of the people listening to this show have already made these switches. Maybe you're not using a lot of these things that we're talking about. You read labels, you've cleaned up your deodorant, your cookware, your personal care, or at least you're in the process of doing so. But if you haven't gotten clean about your oral care yet, consider this your nudge. You are putting this stuff in your mouth 2 to 3 times a day, every single day. And a ton of that absorbs right through that thin tissue under your tongue. So why would you accept synthetic detergents like SLS, artificial dyes, artificial sweeteners, and fluoride in there? There are clean, good brands doing the right thing the right way. Just Ingredients, Redmond, David's, Biocidin, and many others. Ditch the toxic oral care if you haven't already, because this stuff is literally going in your mouth. Let's stop that. And let's for sure stop it with our kids. So here's where this gets bigger than your smile, because it's not just your mouth. That's the front door to 2 of the most important systems in your body, your digestive tract and your airway. And what happens at the front door does not stay at the front door. Let's start with the gut. There's well-documented 2-way relationship that researchers now call the gut-oral axis. We've heard about the gut-brain axis, right? We hear about all these axes because the body doesn't work as a bunch of individual parts. It works as one cohesive unit, or at least it's designed to. So the oral gut axis is real. And in just 2025, last year, a review of nearly 250 published studies described it clearly. The bacteria in your mouth And the bacteria in your gut are in constant communication. Every time you swallow, and you swallow over 1,000 times a day, you're sending a wave of oral bacteria straight down into your gut. If your mouth is dysbiotic, you are seeding your gut with the wrong organisms day after day, and it runs the other direction too. When your gut is inflamed and out of balance, that shows up in your mouth. This is why I can't talk about oral health as a standalone thing. If your gut is a mess, you can do everything right in your mouth and keep losing ground because you're being reseeded from below. And it reaches even further than that, not just your gut, but to your heart and your brain. Now, this is newer emerging research. And I'm not going to tell you that brushing your teeth prevents heart disease, but the picture researchers are uncovering is striking. The same pathogens that drive gum dysbiosis, names like Porphyromonas gingivalis, they don't always stay in your mouth. They've been found turning up in arterial plaque, and there's a long recognized association between gum health and cardiovascular health, partly having to do with nitrites, but partly having to do with bacteria as well. It's beyond the nitric oxide picture. Even more eye-opening, a landmark study in 2019 found the same gum bacterium and the toxic enzymes it produces present in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease, which has cracked open a whole new field of research on the oral brain connection. Now let's talk about the airway, the respiratory system, because this is one most people have never even considered. A lot of folks have chronic sinus issues, congestion, postnasal drip, that stuffed up feeling that never fully goes away. And when your nose is blocked, what do? Well, you breathe through your mouth, especially at night. And there's this chain reaction that happens. Mouth breathing dries out your mouth. Saliva is one of the single most important defenses that you have because it buffers acid, it carries protective compounds, it keeps the whole ecosystem in balance. And when your mouth goes dry every night for hours at a time, you create a perfect condition for the wrong bacteria to take over. A 2020 study comparing mouth breathing children to nose breathing children found measurably different and less favorable bacterial populations in the mouth breathers, along with changes in the protective proteins in their saliva. So when you ask, can my sinus problems be driving my oral problems? The answer that the research supports is absolutely yes. Chronic congestion pushes you into mouth breathing. Mouth breathing dries you out, and dryness tips the garden towards dysbiosis. Which brings me to something you've probably seen all over social media: mouth taping. Now, let me know, or let me tell you how I feel about mouth taping, because the science isn't super strong, but there is some good science. To me, though, it just makes sense. If you are finding yourself being a mouth breather, there's really good anecdotal evidence and some pretty decent scientific evidence that I think is going to be backed up as we go, that mouth taping could change a lot. And I can tell you that I told you I ate a lot of sugar as a kid. Well, I also was a mouth breather as a kid. And I don't know if it, is the structure of my sinus cavity or any of that kind of stuff. I'm not sure, but woke up with a dry mouth all the time. And maybe it was that combination of things, because you may already know this about me. I never was on an antibiotic as a kid, not once. So, in fact, the first one was when I was 45 years old for a surgical procedure that I couldn't get out of, drove me crazy. But my point is, there's a lot of different things to keep in mind here. And so I think mouth taping could make a lot of sense as well. Now, let's talk about the actual protocol that I promised you at the beginning of the show, because we've already talked about the problem, and now we're talking about, some solutions. We're not nuking our mouth anymore. Perhaps we're mouth taping, but there are some things that you can do. And the first thing is, like I said, clean up the oral health stuff, your toothpaste or your tooth powder. Make sure it's clean. Make sure it's got the right stuff in it. I'm a huge, huge fan of hydroxyapatite stuff. I like it from Just Ingredients, and I love it from David's. Both of those are excellent. I actually alternate those myself, along with something called Biocidin, Dentalcidin Oral Care System. Now, Biocidin is not a company that was started by Cellcore, but it's a company that's been bought by Cellcore, and they're this really symbiotic couple of companies, I think. And when I discovered Biocidin a year ago, I fell in love. You've heard me talk about it here on this show before. I've been using the Dentalcidin LSF oral spray on a regular basis. I don't use it every single day, but I use it at least probably 5 or 6 times a week, and I rinse with it. put some on my toothbrush, or I'll spray it straight into my mouth and rinse. I just kind of play around with it a little bit. And I've also used a lot of the Biocidin, Dentalcidin oral care toothpaste. Now, it's the most expensive toothpaste we sell. Even me buying it wholesale, I don't use it all the time. And I've said that on this show before, but I do work it in. I do it at least a couple of times a week, along with using the Biocidin, Dentalcidin spray. So this is part of my regimen. Now, if you've got significant oral health issues, which by the way, I don't have anymore, my mouth is doing really, really well. I don't get the cavities that I used to get. I've had the root canals removed. Things are better in my mouth, but it took some doing for sure. I don't have the gingivitis that I used to have. I don't have the receding gums that I used to have. I've gotten through and past all of that by doing the types of things that I'm sharing with you right now on this show. So I personally, and you get to decide how you want to do this, I rotate. I rotate things. I use Just Ingredients tooth powder. I love it. It feels like I just got my teeth cleaned when I use it. I do that 2 or 3 times a week, probably. I will use David's toothpaste, the hydroxy toothpaste. That's my go-to toothpaste right now. Probably use that, I don't know, maybe half of my brushings or something like that. And then I also use a neem oil that I'll put a drop or two on my toothbrush, or a neem toothpaste from a company called Theraneem. I did a show on neem not too long ago that we can link to the show description for you to talk about that, because it works on the terrain side of things. So I kind of fiddle around with it. I do a bunch of different stuff. And then I use Dentalcidin toothpaste probably 3 or 4 times a week. I did it for a couple of months straight when I first discovered it, because I really wanted to just kind of clean things up. Dentalcidin has been shown to actually benefit the oral microbiome in terms of kind of shifting the balance of power from the bad guys to the good guys. And I absolutely love it. So if you're really struggling, I recommend just doing the Dentalcidin system. That's the toothpaste itself and the Dentalcidin LSF spray, and doing both, and doing them consistently for 2 or 3 months at least, until you feel like you've got on top of it. And then if you want to rotate things in, I think that makes sense. Economically, it makes sense, because David's toothpaste, which I absolutely love, which has the hydroxy in it that the Biocidin one doesn't, so helping with preventing cavities and things like that. And it's like a third of the price. And so, when we're just talking economics, it makes sense. But initially, you can jump into the Dentalcidin oral care system. Or if you feel like your mouth is in relatively good shape, but you get some cavities here and there, you got a little bit of gum bleeding here and there, that type of thing, like probably a lot of the people listening to this show are dealing with that, then I would say just use the Dentalcidin stuff as part of your regimen. Perhaps you're brushing with Dentalcidin in the morning, you're brushing with David's at night, or vice versa. I think it probably makes actually the most sense to do the Dentalcidin at night and let it sit there for a little while. And then I'm going to talk about the secret weapon that I'm so excited about, that I just started using. Even though my oral health is pretty good, I've decided to go after it even a little bit harder, because the more I read about this, the more I study about it, the more important I think it really is. Now, there's some really, really cool evidence about all the Biocidin stuff in terms of what it does specifically at the biofilm level. And the reason that Biocidin is fantastic in the gut, and the reason that the liposomal form, the LSF form, not the Dentalcidin, but the original Biocidin in the LSF form, is so good for antimicrobial stuff throughout the entire body, is because it goes after biofilms, and it goes after them in a really, really powerful way. Fantastic for SIBO and all that kind of stuff as well. And I think you're going to get some of those benefits with the Dentalcidin too, because you're still putting it in your mouth. It's still going to absorb. You're still going to get benefits, even all the way down to the gut, because, well, again, those two communities are talking all day long, at least 1,000 times as you're swallowing. So really, really important to understand all of that. But the secret weapon is the Dental Flora dissolvable oral probiotic. I just discovered this when we were at the Cellcore event in Boise just a couple of months ago. In fact, as I'm recording this, it was a month ago about. This product is awesome. It has one ingredient in it called Bliss M18. It sounds like an explosive, kind of, but it's not. It's the most studied oral probiotic strain in the world, and it is a true oral native. It's a pioneer colonizer of a healthy mouth. What makes it special is that it produces what are called bacteriocins, a set of natural compounds that selectively crowd out trouble-making species, including the main one associated with cavities, Streptococcus mutans. A 2013 study in children found that those who colonized well with M18 had significantly lower plaque scores, with the biggest improvements in kids who started with the worst plaque. A 2015 study followed high cavity risk children for 90 days and found their overall risk profile improved dramatically. And it produces enzymes that actually help to break down the plaque and neutralize the acid that erodes enamel. This is the strain in this specific product doing most of the heavy lifting, and it's backed by real, true human research. And when we think about the combination of the biocide and herbs that working to restructure the oral microbiome by wiping out a lot of the pathogenic stuff and helping to strengthen the good guys, when we look at that, breaking down the biofilms and all that stuff, and then we look at rebuilding the bacteria itself with this specific salivarius form, I think it just makes all kinds of sense. I'm really, really excited to be using it for the first time myself, just right before I started doing this episode of the show. Now, there's two other probiotics in there. One of them is one of my favorite superstars, Lactobacillus reuteri, which I just talked about at length in the last show, but there's some really cool stuff for oral health with it. But this one is called Lactobacillus paracasei, and it's a clever one. Research shows that it can physically grab onto Streptococcus mutans, that's the main cavity-causing bug, and clump it together so that it gets escorted out of your mouth when you swallow, instead of sticking to your teeth and building plaque. And it does that selectively without disrupting the friendly bacteria around it. That's the whole gardening philosophy packed into a single strain. Really, really cool stuff. And I talked about the M18 version of the salivarius, but they also have a regular version of the salivarius, which of course, is bacteria found in the saliva. It produces its own antimicrobial compounds and has been studied for supporting healthy gums and a balanced plaque environment. One study even found that it helped improve gum condition and reduce plaque in smokers who tend to have a rougher oral environment to start with. And then one of my superstar strains of probiotics, Lactobacillus reuteri, I get so excited about because it's just such an incredible bacteria for so many reasons. It makes a natural antimicrobial substance called ruterin, and that ruterin competes with the troublemakers for space and food rather than nuking them. A 2006 study in people with significant gum inflammation found that L-reuteri reduced both gum bleeding and plaque in just 2 weeks. On top of that, it's one of the most versatile, well-loved probiotics in the human body. And like I said, one of my super strains, like I talked about on the last episode of the show. You put the four together and you've got an incredible team. And then they also sweeten it with xylitol, the natural sweetener that is not just for taste. It does taste good, but xylitol helps stimulate saliva flow. Remember how important saliva is, and the wrong bacteria can't ferment it the way they ferment sugar. So it doesn't feed the acid producers. It's a beautiful little detail of how they made this formula. I really, really like it. Now, this is important. A practical note on using this: if you're using the rinse, the dental side and rinse, wait for about 30 minutes before you dissolve your dental flora. And then don't eat or drink after that. Let the dental flora sit in your mouth while you sleep. So that's a little bit of a challenge, I know. My routine is not set up to do that. I'm going to have to learn how to do that, basically brushing my teeth a little earlier than I normally do, and then doing the dental flora. So I'm actually have the bottle of dental flora on my nightstand, and that's going to be the last thing I pop in my mouth before I go to bed. I think it makes a ton of sense. And there's no problem with that. There's no problem with not brushing afterwards because it has the xylitol, it has the probiotics. No issue that way. And it tastes mildly minty, so it's not going to leave a gross taste in your mouth either. But you do want to give yourself probably 20 or 30 minutes with either the toothpaste, the dental side and toothpaste, or the dental side and rinse. Let it do its thing, and then put in the dental flora probiotic. So the last thing I want to talk about on this episode, just kind of a short one here for you today, is vital spores as the other side of this, or back on track. Now, I talked all about these on the last episode, so I'm not going to go into details about what they do. But if you're not doing a probiotic for your gut, specifically a spore probiotic for your gut, and you're having oral health issues, you've got to do a spore for your gut. You've got to, because again, the communication going back and forth, the oral gut connection is real. It's over 1,000 times a day that they're communicating with each other. Make sure your oral dysbiosis is dissolved if you want your gut dysbiosis resolved. If you've got a lot of gut issues and your mouth is a mess, you got to resolve the gut issues. If you've got a lot of oral issues and your gut is a mess, you've got to resolve. They both work together in tandem. And you would use vital spores for the gut or back on track, depending on if you also want the enzymes. And then one more thing, I talked about the sinuses, I talked about the mouth breathing thing. Let's talk about this, because if you have chronic congestion that keeps pushing you into the mouth breathing thing, then dealing with the nose is part of dealing with the mouth. And here's a piece most people have never heard of. A lot of chronic sinus trouble isn't bacterial at all. It's actually fungal. Researchers at the Mayo Clinic back in 1999 studied a couple hundred chronic sinus sufferers and found fungus in the mucus of how many? 96% of people with chronic sinus issues had fungus in their mucus. They concluded that the body's immune reaction to that fungus was driving most chronic sinus issues. Now, why do you think that happens? I've talked about this on previous episodes, having nothing to do with oral health, everything to do with respiratory health. But this is a really, really important thing, and it's something that I don't think is talked about nearly enough. People that get sinus infections in America are generally treated with antibiotics. If you didn't get sinus infections, but you got yeast infections, or you got urinary tract infections, or you got ear infections, or you got, colds and things like that, and you get on an antibiotic for whatever it is that you're dealing with, well, we know they take no prisoners, and they're going to do that in the sinuses as well. And then what you have is a sinus microbiome that is dysbiotic. You've got dysbiosis in the sinuses. This is this amazing place where it's warm, it's dark, and it's moist. Why wouldn't fungus grow there? Of course it does. And guess what antibiotics don't do? They don't kill fungal things. And this is why I think so many people end up with chronic sinus issues, postnasal drip, chronic sinusitis, chronic allergy issues, sinus cavity problems, and then oral problems, which can then lead into gut problems. So we always have to look at the body as a system. And how do you wipe out fungus if antibiotics aren't wiping it out? Well, there is a secret weapon that I discovered years ago, and it's one of my favorite secret weapons. It's the Nano Silver Nasal Wash. And we have it in our brand now because I've had so much success with it over the years. Silver has been valued for a very long time for helping to clean things up. And the Nano Silver Nasal Wash is exactly for that purpose. If you go after that potential fungal issue in your sinuses, and you do that a couple of sprays up each nostril, at least 3 or 4 times a day for 10 days, 2 weeks, somewhere in that range, and be doing vital spores or back on track for at least a few months to make sure that you're rebuilding and restructuring the gut and getting the bacteria where it needs to be so the body can fight its own battles. I can't tell you how many dozens and dozens and dozens of thankful people have told me that resolved their issue, that resolved their chronic sinus issues, and in many cases improved their oral health as well. It's one of the least expensive things that you can do. It's one of the most straightforward things that you can do. You're talking $19.99 for a bottle of this stuff, and it is absolutely game-changing for so many people. Of course, also there is the diet. Lay off the sugar. If you're struggling with the sugar, try berberine, try chromium, try the GLP-1 metabolic optimizer, because it has changed the game for me. My sweet teeth were not removed by the dentist, but they have been told to shut up by the GLP-1 metabolic optimizer, and it's been awesome. Truly awesome. Another thing to consider is tongue scraping. My favorite tongue scraper out there right now is the David's tongue scraper. Stainless steel, does the job. Much of the bacteria gets stuck in that kind of shag carpet of the tongue, and the tongue scraper can help to get rid of that. So for most of my life, I just thought I had bad genes, bad teeth, 8 root canals, all kinds of issues. But what I found was that probably, or at least I guess looking back on it, I really can't prove it, but it's pretty clear to me. Way too much sugar, not enough brushing as a child, and probably way too much mouth breathing. And that has led to more health problems than anything else that I've ever done. And I'm convinced of that. I know it. I've got very strong evidence that that's what led to my hip issues that I've had. And so I can't tell you how important this topic is for me. So this oral health topic that I'm talking about, take it seriously. And it's easy. You may not need to do the things I'm recommending. If your dental health is great, you don't have a mouth full of issues, then you're probably doing it right already. Disregard this episode. But if you've got these issues, if you've got sinus issues, if you've got oral issues, if you've got gut issues, they're all tied together. Address them all, not just one. And if you have this issue and you need a little support, one way that I want to support you besides the education is if you'll buy 3 or more of the items that I mentioned on this show. That includes the probiotics. It includes any of the dental side and products. It includes the David's toothpaste and so on. Any of those items, 3 or more of them, you'll get 20% off. That's only for the next 30 days, though, after this show airs. Okay, so 30 days in our stores or online at vitalitynutrition.com. It'll happen in your cart automatically. You won't even have to put in a code or anything. Remember, I'm not your doctor and I'm not your dentist, and I don't want to be either one of those guys. I would have gone to school to do that if that's what I wanted to do. I am your guy that hopefully helps you learn how to supplement correctly to optimize your health and vitality. If you have questions, call us 801-292-6662 or visit us in Bountiful or South Ogden if you're local. I'd love to see you there. Thank you so much for listening to me. My name's Jared St. Clair, and this has been Vitality Radio. Thanks for listening to the Vitality Radio podcast. If this episode helped you, follow the show, share it with someone, and explore trusted education and resources at vitalitynutrition.com. See you next time.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Vitality Radio. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast has not been evaluated by the FDA. This podcast is provided with the understanding that the information shared is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. This podcast is not a substitute for professional care by a medical professional. Thank you.